What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with another reaction. In this, we have India's civilizational influence on Southeast Asia from Professor Tantayong. Before we dive into this, I can't wait to see what the influence has been. If you guys happen to enjoy, please don't forget to subscribe, get a video a thumbs up, and if you would like to become a member or support this channel by becoming a member, all you gotta do is hit that join button to receive your exclusive benefits. Let's dive right in.
How did India influence the development or evolution of Singapore?
Singapore per se was probably not as deep, but India's influence, civilizational influence as you call it, on Southeast Asia was quite profound. You think of religion, Hinduism, Buddhism, it spread from India to parts of Southeast Asia and influenced culture, literature, architecture of major parts of Southeast Asia. Look at Borobudur, look at Angkor Wat. All these were influenced by Indian religions. Buddhism became very prominent in places like Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. And then, of course, languages, Sanskrit and literature. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata, I think, continues to be sort of performed in different parts of Indonesia, although it's kind of adapted to more Southeast Asian flavors. In terms of Singapore, basically it was the trading of the place, and the regional dynamics when the Cholas came down to trade and sometimes invaded. Majapahit rose and fell, Srivijaya as well. It had an impact on Singapore. Now think of the political systems as well. The Indian Mandala system, where you had decentralized kingdoms in the head of the Raja or Maharaja. I think this was the system that operated in Southeast Asia during that time. Yes. And Singapore had a place in that kind of dynamics. If you think of our history, Temasek, it was a prince who, in a way, came from Palembang, set up a place and renamed it Singapura. And then after that, there was the movements of people to Malacca. The kings ran away to Malacca because, again, of regional dynamics and fights and invasions. And then the Malacca Sultanate rose and Singapore faded. So all these were, in a way, generated by the kinds of politics that happened during that time. And the politics, culture, society, religion, all had deep influences from India. So in a way, Singapore was indirectly influenced, but Indian influence on Southeast Asia was quite deep and profound.
That's crazy to think about, how India influenced Southeast Asia in so many different categories when it comes to religion, society, politics, all of these things. India had a deep influence on all of Southeast Asia. And says Singapore, even though it wasn't directly, still indirectly. So there may be countries where India maybe didn't directly influence, but indirectly, India still played a big influence on these countries in Southeast Asia. So that really is wild to think about. How much of you guys knew that? And, I mean, what do you guys think of that? Like, that's pretty incredible.
Profound.
What would then be the continuity if you look across maybe the 700-year horizon? From maybe if we look back at the 13th century where we start to see some influence of trade in this area in Singapore, all the way till today, right? There are some continuities that are, I wouldn't say dictated by the forces of history, but maybe by geography, by economics. So what are some of the continuities you see as a historian?
So the continuities, I'll say, in terms of Singapore's role in the dynamics of the region, one is in trade. So it has always played the role of a kind of a port polity, whether it's a small town, a small city, or even just a port infrastructure. It has always, because of its location, supported trade dynamics of the region. So from Southeast Asia to China, the Ming sort of trade, to the Middle East sometimes, and to, of course, northern part of Southeast Asia, Thailand and so on. So Singapore has always, in a way, been in a strategic location that has served the trading routes of the region. So that's one continuity. I think the second continuity is that, because it is able to adapt to different political configurations, whether it's empire, Srivijaya, then later Majapahit, or whether it is part of the Malacca or Johor Sultanate, it's always been able to adapt to shifting circumstances, making itself relevant. And when it's no longer relevant, Singapore fades into obscurity. But when it's relevant, it becomes important. So one example is when it served as the Shah Bandar of Johor Sultanate. it was able to become useful to not only Johore's trade with the region and with China, but the European trade that was already developing at the time, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and then later Dutch East Indies. So this was where Singapore had that role to play because of its location and because of its ability to serve different kind of trading configurations. So this was the continuity. So from the 14th century, you see that at different times, it has always played that role. And today, even as a global city-state, you can say that the essence remains as a port city.
We've seen, I think
it
it's
sounds like Singapore has absolutely played a big role when it comes to trade between so many different countries. And I don't know too much about Singapore. I've never really watched videos about it or learned about Singapore, so this is all new information to me. Again, love to hear you guys' thoughts on the video.
you pointed out, cross-time port cities may gain relevance and then lose its relevance, right? So what are the characteristics of a port city that makes it useful?
Yeah. So connectivity is one thing. If you are not in a good location and you are in some out of the way kind of location, you will not succeed. So I think that's the first thing. The location is important. So where we are located, Straits of Malacca, for centuries, it has always remained an important trade route, and even now, the shipping that flows through the Straits of Malacca is one of the busiest in the world, and Singapore, in a way, is fortunate to be located where it is. Second is basically you are in a world where a lot of trading happens and you can plug yourself into those kinds, as a node, into those kinds of trading routes. So, Singapore was so-called founded by Raffles because he was looking for a foothold to connect India and China by trade. And where it was located, it was almost perfect. You sail down and then the Straits of Malacca, then on to China and vice versa. And monsoon winds at that time, blew in the right directions at different times of the year, facilitating trade. So the connectivity, I would say, would be key. But at the same time, I think you have to stay relevant because there could be different port cities because you don't have monopoly of location. There could be other ports that come up and then they challenge you. So innovation and being able to ride, I guess, the challenges of the time is important. So when steamship came into play, Singapore became a coaling station. So that in a way facilitated the sailing of steamships and all that. And then after independence, Singapore built port facilities and all that because there were competitions from elsewhere, from India, from China. So I think innovation and the continuing attempt to make oneself relevant and connected to those trade routes are important considerations as well. You see instances of port cities that were prominent at one stage. Malacca is a good example. Penang being less prominent today, and that's because of combination of factors, political as well as geographical and technology and innovation.
Singapore did also lose its.
So you got to think luck would have to play a role in it in terms of being geographically put in the right position. But then, innovation. You just got to always be innovating to stay relevant as a port city. And then competition is going to arise, so you got to be able to compete and keep that relevance. So that because I think he said if there's no trade coming your way, you're out of the path, then you're not really going to succeed.
Relevance in the past. I think when you talk about the Shah Bandar, and maybe later you can elaborate as to what its specific function was and what a Shah Bandar is for listeners who might not know. But Singapore did lose its relevance. And in those cases, what were the factors that kind of made it not retain its vital function as a node in that kind of global world pre-1819?
Political shifts were important, and here one can think of current geopolitics. So in the 18th century, you can see that there were political shifts happening around the region. So trade in one area between Johor, Aceh and the Riau, and then you have the Bugis and the Minangkabaus, and then you have the European trades. They all were trying to sort of carve up different parts of Southeast Asia for themselves. So if you happen to be in an area that is thriving and growing, then I guess you get carried by the momentum. But Singapore happened to be in a part from at the turn of the 19th century where the influence of the political powers of the time, the Malay world of the Johor Sultanate, was fading in connection with the rise of the Bugis power and also the Europeans trading in the area. So when you are caught in that kind of scenario, then you fade. So I think that was the situation that Singapore was in just before Raffles arrived and then signed the treaty with the Temanggung. The Shah Bandar is actually a place at the tip of the Johor Sultanate where it served as a very convenient location for goods to be gathered and distributed and exported out, a collection point if you want. But it was also a kind of a point where the Johor Sultanate could interact with the rest of the world without going inland, you see. So again, its location where it is served that particular purpose. So Singapore was a good intermediate point if you want between the inland and the waters around it. So that was the purpose that Singapore served as part of the Shah Bandar. But I think what happened was that trade, the prominence of the trade then started to fade as the Europeans came into the picture and the Bugis and the Minangkabau started moving into the peninsula and dominating the trade there. So the trade on the Aceh, Riau, Johor side started to fade a little. So that in a way was the change in the power configuration. So when you have major shifts like that, it affects players in the region. So if you want to sort of have a present day parallel, is when geopolitics shift, supply chains are disrupted, and then it will affect the players on that kind of situation.
So what do you guys think? Like I said, didn't know really anything about Singapore, but it's very interesting. First off, to hear how India's influence reached out to all of Southeast Asia, whether that be directly or indirectly. But then they kind of hear about Singapore. That's what we see. Yeah, Singapore as like one of those very important port cities, and being able to stay relevant for so long and being able to innovate for so long, I think is also incredible. But I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts on the video is. If you enjoy it, please don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the next one. I'll see y'all next time.